Hello, so this is a revision video for the sociology of youth, and in this video I'm looking at topic 1, which is youth culture and subculture. This is for OCR's A-level sociology. It might be of interest for people who are just interested in sociology, even if you haven't studied youth culture and subculture before. Okay, so to begin with, before we get started going into the different theoretical explanations and the different perspectives, we need to talk about definitions, and we need to be clear on these before we move on. So to begin with, we need to define youth. So youth is defined as the period of life between childhood and adulthood. It is a social construction because in some societies, youth is defined slightly differently. It's longer in some societies than others. It's changed over time. There hasn't always been a period known as youth. So it is a social construction. Culture is the way of life of a group of people. Subculture is a group within a larger culture with their own norms and values. So often we associate subcultures with deviance and almost like a negative, but it's not necessarily negative. You can have subcultures that are positive, if you like, or just, they just have to have different norms and values going against the norm. And then in this video, I'll be talking about spectacular youth subcultures. And these are the highly visible youth subcultures formed in Britain between the 1950s and the 1970s. So, for example, teddy boys, mods, rockers, skinheads, punks. They are the main spectacular youth subcultures. Okay, so to begin with, talking about functionalist explanations. So functionalists were the ones who really started talking about youth. And the key ideas here of the functionalist explanations is that youth and youth culture is a kind of homogenous group. They see all young people as the same, fitting into this same category of youth. And they really focus on youth being a kind of transitory phase. It's all about socialization, going from being a child to being an adult. And they say that youth was formed post-World War II due to demographic changes like the baby boom, consumerism, and American culture, so American films and music, for example. So the key studies for functionalism are Parsons, Eisenstadt, and Abrams. So Parsons, this idea of youth being a transitional stage. So again, Parsons really focusing on the socialization aspect of this period of youth. So what is the purpose of it from a sociological point of view? For Parsons, it's that it does offer this transitory phase between childhood, where you don't have many responsibilities, to adulthood, where you do have lots of responsibilities, and youth offers this kind of transitory phase between. Eisenstadt, similarly, talking about youth as a period of integration, so you're learning the kind of norms and values of being an adult, and also this idea of it being a safety valve, somewhere you can let off steam. You can be a little bit deviant and kind of get away with it. You might get told off, but it's not like as an adult when you've got lots of responsibilities and you commit a crime. It can be very, very serious. And then Abrams talked about this concept of the teenage consumer. It's kind of classic study, and this idea that because young people had more disposable income, advertisers then started to target young people, and this then created this period of youth that or it extended this period of youth because more people had disposable income. So in terms of evaluation, what do we think about this? Well, if you look at the dates of all the studies, 40s and 50s, they're focusing on American white middle class male youth. So is it, are they up to speed? Are they relevant in the 21st century? There might be some ideas that are relevant, particularly things like integration and this idea of the safety valve. But, for a 21st century student looking at this, you might think, well, actually, what about class? What about ethnicity? What about gender? Okay, so that's functionalist explanations. Now we're going to Marxist, or more specifically Neo-Marxist explanations, and in this I'll be talking about class as well. So the key ideas here, really in a nutshell, is that Marxist, Neo-Marxists focus on working class youth and youth subcultures, and they see working class youth joining youth subcultures as a form of resistance against capitalism. So it's a way of working class youth kind of resisting their position in a capitalist society. And the main group was the Centre for Contemporary Cultural Studies, who were writing in the kind of 70s and 80s. They were really at the centre of this. They were based in Birmingham. So, key studies. Hall and Jefferson, spectacular youth subcultures as a form of resistance. So, looking at groups like the Teddy Boys, for example, and it's just a kind of classic way of working class youth resisting their position in society. Clark taking this on, looking at skinheads. Skinheads are a form of resistance, and saying that skinheads really are an exaggerated form of working class masculinity. So again, it's about this resistance. Working class youth might not have economic power, but they can have kind of subcultural power. They can have this kind of street power, if you like. People might fear them because they're dressed in this kind of exaggerated way. Hebditch talked about punks and this concept of bricolage. So punks using everyday items and kind of repurposing them. So bin bags as clothes, or safety pins as earrings, for example. And Hebditch, says this is resistance against capitalism. You're repurposing these things. You're not buying new clothes. You're not buying earrings. So it's working class youth resisting capitalism. The whole punk ethos, the kind of DIY ethos, goes against capitalist ideas of kind of, consumerism. Break talked about this concept of the magical solutions. So youth subcultures offer magical solutions to working class youth. So it can be a way of working class youth kind of escaping their position, but they're magical because they don't really solve anything. Okay, in terms of evaluation here, this has been criticised, the CCCS have been criticised by feminist sociologists for being male stream, so focusing on young men, not looking at young women. Also ethnocentric, only really talking about white working class youth. And then the big one is kind of that they're looking for meanings that aren't there. Were all punks resisting against capitalism, or was some of them just going along because they liked the style and they liked the music? So this might be a case of these neo-Marxists looking for things and putting meanings on things that didn't really exist. Also, what about middle-class subcultures like hippies? Were they resisting capitalism? If so, then doesn't that kind of undermine the idea that youth subcultures are resisting capitalism because it's about working class? If not, then why are they different? So that is kind of a little bit left unanswered. Okay, so now we move on to feminist explanations and also talking about gender here. So the key ideas in terms of feminist explanations on youth culture and subculture is kind of there's two sides to it. On one hand, it could be that young women have been marginalized from youth subcultures due to social control, or were they central to youth subcultures, but they've been ignored by sociologists? So, it could be both as well, couldn't it? That they were somewhat marginalized and the ones that were there have been ignored. So the classic study is McRobbie and Garber, who coined this concept of bedroom culture. And this is the idea that young women, because they were marginalized from the regular youth subcultures, had to form their own subcultures in the bedroom, which is based around kind of gossip and magazines. And McRobbie and Garber argue that that's a valid subculture, but it was just it had to take place within the whole home because of social control. Thornton talks about the lack of kind of subcultural capital that young women had and were therefore marginalized. They didn't have as much disposable income. They were not taken seriously, and therefore they're kind of marginalized from the main youth subcultures. On the other hand, Hollands kind of contradicts that and says actually in recent times young women are much less restricted and are able to take part in kind of club culture, for example, much more readily than young women were able to in the 1960s, for example, with the youth subcultures then. On the other hand, Reddington offers a kind of counterpoint to this idea and says actually that there were young women involved in the punk movement who were central, so kind of Vivienne Westwood or the band The Slits, very, very central to the punk movement. And so Reddington argues that they've just been kind of ignored by male stream sociologists. In terms of evaluation, perhaps we could talk about class here, bedroom culture. For example, if young women are sharing a room, they might not be able to have this kind of bedroom culture. Working class young women perhaps not able to be involved in youth subcultures the same way that middle class young women are, for example. Okay, so now we go on to postmodernism and postmodernist ideas on youth culture and subculture. So the key idea here, the real main thing to take away from this, is that youth subcultures are a thing of the past. Things are much more fluid nowadays. Consumerism, globalization, and hybridity have meant that people can kind of pick and mix and move in and out of different subcultures. And the two key studies here are Maffesoli and Polymus. Maffesoli comes up with the concept of neo-tribes, and this is the idea of groups that aren't as fixed as traditional subcultures, where people can move more freely between them. So this is neo-tribes rather than youth subcultures. And Polymus coins the concept of the supermarket of style. So it's this idea of kind of pick and mix, that people can now pick and mix their style. So one day they could be a punk, the next day they could be a hippie, and it's there for sale. If you go into a clothes shop, these things are all pre-ripped jeans, for example. You can become a punk quite easily. So it's linked to consumerism. In terms of evaluation, Hodgkinson did a study on goths in 2002 that argues that distinct subcultures still do exist. So that study is really good evaluation to postmodernism. Postmodernism is a good one to use for evaluation for everything else. So postmodernists say youth subcultures don't exist anymore, gender, ethnicity, class not as important, but Hodgkinson is the one that you can use to argue against postmodernist. And also this idea of class, ethnicity, gender, you could say actually are still important in youth culture and subculture. Not everybody has the same opportunities or income to take part. Okay, last but not least, talking about ethnicity, hybridity, and youth culture. So in terms of the impact of ethnicity on youth culture, Hebdige, I think, put it best, and Hebdige, a neo-Marxist part of the CCCS, said that British youth subcultures are a succession of differential responses to the black immigrant presence in Britain. So if you go back to the Teddy Boys, what did they listen to? Rock and roll. Rock and roll comes from blues. If you think about the hippies, the punks, what did they listen to? They listened to kind of reggae. If you think about the punks, they were closely linked to kind of reggae as well. And so this idea that youth subcultures have constantly been responding to Black American and Black immigrant influence. Hebdige also studied Rastafarians and said that Rastafarian style was a way of people resisting racism and capitalism, kind of not embracing capitalism, not going along with what kind of society was telling them to do. So it's a form of resistance, and that's linked to ethnicity. Joe Hall talked about this concept of a hyper-ethnic style from some youth from ethnic minority backgrounds, which is this idea of a kind of exaggerated form of their parent culture, kind of empowerment through difference. So really embracing their culture as a way of having a strong identity. And then hybridity comes in here, which is a postmodernist idea, but it's very much linked to ethnicity, because often hybridity is related to different kind of styles, ethnic styles. So Nyack came up with the concept of the white wannabes, who are white working class youth who adopted black style, listening to kind of rap music, for example. On rap music, Cashmore said that rap is the ultimate hybrid music form. So because if you go to different countries, there's often rap from those countries, and it's embraced different types of music. If you think about something like grime in the UK, which is a combination of maybe garage, rap, dance music, those kind of things, it's all coming together. So rap is the ultimate hybrid music form. Vale and Juno looked at the modern primitives as a kind of recent hybrid culture. and talked about body modification, which could be seen as a reaction to powerlessness of living in a fast-changing world. So modern primitives are people who've influenced by tribal styles, for example. In terms of evaluation, what about class? What about gender? Those things might still be valid. Okay, I hope this revision video has been useful. If you've got any comments or questions, please leave a comment below. Thank you for listening.